What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Showdown video for the Friday night NBA. And we're going to throw you a little something together here to get you through this one game slate here. We are down to one game. We were just rocking like 4 games not that long ago, but it's all good. We got a good game tonight. Everything, a lot of stuff is on the line here, and we're going to break it down for you and talk you through the game and get you your Showdown lineups in for. We're going to talk about all kinds of sites. So with that being said, let me bring in my co-host here today. For the first time in a while, I'm joined by Andy Means. He's a Duke legend. Andy, man, what's going on, man?
Sad times in the Duke world, man. Got our guy retired next year, but he deserves it, that's for sure. And yeah, this playoffs, man. Yeah, I feel like we had our last 4 game slate of the year. What was that? 2 days ago, and now we're into a 1 game slate. So the times are changing, but it just means the games are going to get better too. So I'm looking forward to breaking it down with you, man.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Coach K and what your thoughts were on him. I'm stepping down, but yeah, good career, man. It's time. So yeah, it's weird, man. I tell you what, this first round of games, and this is one of the is this the last one going on? This might be the last first round series going on, but they did not go the way I thought they. Man, my goodness, man, I dropped several series. If we're betting on games here, and I'm not saying I'm betting because I'm in Texas and it's not legal, but it did not go, man. I thought Portland could pull an upset. That didn't happen. I got suckered into the Knicks. I ain't even going to talk about that. That was never even a contest. But and then the Lakers got, AD getting hurt, really crushed that series for them. So things didn't break the way I thought. And I really thought the Clippers would go in here and take care of business against the Mavs in this series. Man, they have not done it. And then they lost the first 2, and I thought, okay, I knew they were still live, and they win, and they won 2 on the road. I thought maybe they could finish them off, 4 straight wins, and that didn't happen. So now they are fighting for their lives tonight. Man, what have you seen in this series? It's been entertaining, but I mean, did you expect it to play out like this?
I figured it'd go 6 or 7, but I thought I would give the slight edge to the Clippers if you asked me before the series. And I still think I might give the slight edge to them, even though they're still down 3-2. Like if you look at just the general scoring in this series, the Clippers are actually outscoring the Mavs by 14 points total, even though they're down in the series. If you look at the 3-point shooting, the Clippers are, they're at a certain point, they would have broken the league record for team 3-point field goal percentage in the regular season. They're at like 41 or 42%. In this series, they're down to like 36. The inverse is true for the Mavs. They were at like 36 for the season, and they're up at like 42% in this series. Yet you factor that in, and the Clippers are still outscoring them from a total perspective. So I still do kind of think the Clippers they're obviously live to win the series. That's not a hot take or anything, but I think like if you fast forward to who do you think would win in Game 7? Like let's say the Clippers win tonight, who do you think would win in Game 7? I think most people would say the Clippers, and I think the Clippers are favored tonight by like 2 or 3 on the road. So I think that's a little telling too that the markets are probably favoring them a little bit. So I do like the Clips. It's been a great series though, and how can you not like watching Luka and Kawhi go back and forth?
Yeah, the one thing you'll notice about Dallas, man, when they're winning games and you look at the box score, Luka's like stroking it from 3. It's crazy how the variance hits. But like I looked up in the second quarter of the last game, and the guy was 5 for 5 from 3-point range. That's kind of not his game, but he's doing it, man. And that's what's getting him to the finish line here. So it's going to be interesting. Before we get cranked up here too much, I do want to say, guys, we appreciate you tuning in. Hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us along here. If you have any questions, fire them off in chat. I'll try to keep track of them and get to them at the end if you're watching. So we got that. And I would be remiss not to mention the RG Premium offering going on right now. Subs for specific sports you can also get a combo package on your subs if that's what you want. We got a link that will drop in chat for $10 off your first month. So that'll help you out with that. But not very much content that's better than RG on some of these sports like basketball's coming to an end, but boy, during basketball season, you got to fire up the Andy Means article, his core plays. That's always a must read every morning. So, and then our lineup HQ projections for basketball were just spot on this year. So it's something you get into. If you got that, get the link, get $10 off now. Let's talk about Clippers. Let's start off with specific for this game. This is where we are, one down showdown. We got to go. We talk about the Clippers here. They're the road team. We know Kawhi is there. We know what he's offering. He's been steady as a rock in this series. Paul George has actually stepped up. I mean, he's got the moniker playoff P, but he's actually done really well in this series. He's took some of the pressure off of Kawhi. But the way they're winning when they're winning, and they're making their comebacks when they were down like 20 points, it's these role players that have stepped up here in some of these games. Reggie Jackson, he's done well. Morris, the Morris boy, when he's hitting from three, they're a tough team. And they finally made some adjustments a couple games ago when they came back and they were down 0-2, and they said they got to change some things up. And they got Nick Batum in there a little bit more. And that's helped them out. And he's been putting up some solid production here. So talk to me about the Clippers in general, what you expect tonight, and some of these role players.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything because and the key is when you talked about Lou making those adjustments a few games ago, because at this point we know, and I'd be surprised if it gets, past this, but like we know he has an 8-man rotation now. Like he's rolling with his two big dogs. He's rolling with Jackson. He's rolling with Morris and Batum. Then they got, some some Zubac and some Rondo. Like those 8 guys, you should feel pretty good. Like if I look at our projections in lineup HQ, like I'm almost certain those are the only 8 guys we have projected. Yeah. So like you don't have to go too far off the reservation here as far as like Clippers you're playing, unless you're max entering these huge top heavy tournaments and you're like going to throw some Beverly in there or something like that. So we know what we're getting from these guys. We know the fantasy production goes to Kawhi and PG. We know past that, it basically goes to Jackson, Morris, Batum. And then Man can get there if he plays more minutes or is, uber efficient. And I actually like Rondo a lot tonight just because, I mean, he's trusted. Like Lou trusts him. He will play him, extend his minutes if he's playing well. This game could go smaller than it usually does. Like the Clippers already play really small. But like, let's say the Mavs like yank some minutes out from underneath Porzingis or something, which they should be doing. Maybe Rondo plays some even more than what he's been playing lately. And you kind of look at his price tag too on both sides. Like on FanDuel, he's I think like 10.5. On DK, he is 5.4. So like he falls in this weird no man's land pricing territory where if you're trying to get all the studs, you're probably not playing Rondo. So like I think, and we know the guy's good per minute too, and we know he has the whole playoff Rondo narrative if you buy into that stuff. So like he has routes to being one of the highest raw fantasy scorers on the slate that's not named Luka, Kawhi, or PG.
Yeah, so you mentioned Pat Beverly. He's basically phased out of the series. So you kind of can mark him out of your player pool if you're being even remotely conservative. The only reason you'd have him in there is, like you said, real dart throws. And the Zubac, and we're going to talk about the Mavs here in just a second, but Zubac goes as Boban goes, really. I think Zubac wouldn't be getting very many minutes here later in this series if it wasn't for Boban being inserted in there and playing now suddenly 20 minutes. And you kind of, I don't know, I think they may be scared of what Boban can do, but it's interesting. So let's talk about the Mavs. That's the first guy I wanted to start with Boban. All of a sudden he's getting 20 minutes. Carlisle's trying to change some things up after giving up those two games at home, and we're getting 20 minutes out of what would you expect out of Boban tonight?
A few things I want to talk about with him. First is like when I have our projections up here on lineup HQ, and this is obviously under the assumption that Boban starts. Like that's what Carlisle did last game. And the fact that we have his minutes where they are is contingent on him starting. So if you see Carlisle make a move and Boban's not starting, obviously these projections are going to change, and he could even just pull a DNP-CD. So like, I do expect him to go with Boban again tonight. I feel like he's kind of doing that and hoping Lou, reacts first and goes back to a bigger lineup because they want them to go bigger. I think it suits them better if like Zubac is out there. So I think that is part of it. What I will note, we all love Boban. Like pretty much, like if there's one player in DFS who feels like he gets you there every time he plays and you roster him is Boban. Like, I feel like the dude always crushes when he plays. What I will note is last game, he played 20 minutes on the dot and he was below a fantasy point per minute. And that's kind of telling because this guy's usually like well above 1 fantasy point per minute. I noticed his rebound rate has been down a little bit in these first 2 games that he's got meaningful minutes. So, like, I love Boban, but I think the ownership is going to follow him tonight. And when I was, I'll put a cheap plug in for one of the articles we're going to have up on NBA Premium today. We do like the Slate IQ thing where we break down like historical data from similar matchups and compare it to like who's always going to be, who's most likely to be in the optimal lineup. What's the ownership look like? We have a bunch of that stuff. And then I add in blurbs underneath all that stuff to kind of to talk about what I'm seeing from that stuff. And Boban's going to be popular. Like on DraftKings tonight, if you put Boban in captain, you can get the 3 studs and you can get 2 other really good players with them. On FanDuel, you can get, on FanDuel, if you think like Luka and MVP, Kawhi and star, Paul George and pro, Boban and one of the util spots, and then whatever you have left is going to be different. It's not going to be different. Everyone's going to be doing that. So my point of saying that is if you have the stones to do it, I think you can get away from Boban. Like, if you look at his rotations here, obviously played his first stints in the first and third quarter, played decently long stints. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Carlisle goes with him and starts him. They don't really play that well in his minutes and he doesn't see the court again. Like, that's well within the range of outcomes of happening tonight. So his ownership is going to be high. He's kind of going to be one of the key decision points on the entire slate if you go overweight or underweight on him. So I'm actually curious on your take on him too. Like, from a tournament perspective, what are you doing with him?
Yeah, it's interesting. You said the range of outcomes on the guy is like the greatest of anybody in this game.
Yeah.
Like you said, it could be nothing, or it could be the guy could literally get you 40 points in 25 real minutes. So that's another interesting part of it. And I don't know if we can even trust this other guy, but Boban is correlated to Zubac. All right, that's from what we've seen so far, and that may change tonight. If the Clippers were smart, that would change. But it seems like the Clippers want to play Zubac in there to counteract Boban because they're a little bit scared of the guy getting the offensive rebounds and the things that he's doing. I heard Mark Cuban say one time when he was talking about Boban, he was like, the guy's a great offensive player, right? He's a great player. He's a very intriguing player, but there's a reason why he hasn't gotten big minutes in the NBA. It's because he's a liability on the defensive end. And by having him in there, you're basically giving up 3-pointers for your 2-pointers that he's going to get you because he just can't step out and guard anybody. You would be beneficial if you were Ty Lue not to fall into that trap of having to match up with Zubac and run it. But we don't know that Lue's going to do that. He hadn't made a whole lot of great decisions in this series. So I think those 2 guys are correlated. If we get a bunch of minutes out of Boban, we could see the same amount of minutes out of Zubac. And so there's something there for tournaments and cash games. I don't know, but I'm with you on Boban's range of outcomes. It's crazy. We'll talk about the salary here in a minute on DK, but talk about a couple more guys from the Mavs real quick. I want to talk about Luka real quick. Like, he's had some great games this series, and he's had a couple of poor games, and the instinct is to chalk up the poor games to the neck injury. But what do you think it was the neck injury that caused the poor games, or did they just defend better in those games and make him look bad? And maybe he wasn't hitting his outside shots.
He wasn't, but he also didn't take as many. So, like, you look at his shot attempts that game, and they were, his threes were the lowest of any game that series. And we're talking about game 4 specifically, where I do think it was bothering him. And another thing to point out, why another notch in the column of why I think it was bothering him is I think they had 2 days between games, between game 4 and game 5, where when you're dealing with like muscular stuff like that, like, or nerve, I think it was nerve stuff too. I think that every extra day matters. Like, I think that kind of shows to how aggressive he was in game 5. I mean, he took 37 shots. I know there's crazy stats out there of like how of all the buckets they scored, he either scored or assisted on X amount of them, which was like the highest ever or something crazy in a playoff game. So the thing about him is, and I have 2 points here. One is he's the only guy on this slate who can realistically get you 70 DK points. Kawhi could get there, sure. But like, it's not in his like 90th percentile outcome, I don't think. Because like Kawhi has PG to deal with. PG has Kawhi deal with. They kind of cannibalize each other. Luka doesn't have that. Like Porzingis is not that guy anymore. Sorry, everybody, but he is not that guy. So like, and Luka's got 70 plus DK points on 3 of 5 games in this series. So like that just shows you kind of how easy he can get it too. And the other point I want to make to that is when I was talking about that Slate IQ article we had that you should check out on Rotogrinders is Luka is projecting to be the highest owned captain, but the likelihood of him also being in the captain slot in the optimal lineup is even higher than his ownership is projecting to be. And personally, I think when everyone sees what you can do by putting Boban in the captain spot, you're like, oh, I can play Boban. I love playing Boban. Oh, I can play Luka, Kawhi, and PG, and I can play 2 like guys who are going to play 30 or 40 minutes tonight with them. I'm definitely doing that. Like, I think despite what projected ownership might say, I think the Boban and captain lineup is going to be extremely popular. And I hate saying not to do that, but if you want to take down first place in a top heavy tournament, you might have to not play Boban and play Luka in the captain instead. I think when the night's over, assuming Boban starts, I think we'll be surprised at how low owned Luka is in the captain slot tonight.
Yeah. So you mentioned the guy a couple of times. I want you to kind of talk me through it. What's wrong with Porzingis right now?
I don't know, man. Like, they basically, I don't think it's necessarily anything wrong with him. Like at this point in his career or the way his body is, his athleticism, he's mainly just a spot up shooter when he's playing with Luka, and he's a liability defensively because he's so slow. Like he's a decent rim protector, but you heard PG saying the other day, like they don't even think he's that good of a rim protector. PG had a comment to the media that we think we can get to the rim at will because they don't have a rim protector. That's kind of a stinging remark to Porzingis that they just don't really think he's a threat down there. So if you look at the 5 games the Mavs and Clippers have played in this series, the Mavs have been outscored in Porzingis' minutes. So I think he's kind of been, from a real life perspective and a fantasy perspective, like he's only broken 30 fantasy points, I think, once. And I think that was in game 1. You look at his rebounds, way down. Like they have this stat on NBA advanced stats called rebounding chances. I think in the regular season, he averaged like almost 14 rebound chances per game, which meant he averaged roughly 9 rebounds per game. In this series, he's had like, I think it was 6 or 7, or no, it was 9 rebound chances, and his average rebounds were like 4.5. Like he's not rebounding. His usage is down a little bit. He got in foul trouble last game a little bit. So I don't know. Like I'm not saying Carlisle's just going to like yank him out. That has long-term effects. If you're like, they got this guy under contract under 3 or 4 years. So that has long-term effects, but I don't know what the problem is. I just know he's just not that effective of a fantasy player for sure. And you can make the argument, not a real life player either. So the flip side to that whole discussion I just had there is that he also has probably the highest ceiling on the slate outside of the 3 studs, but we just haven't seen it. So I don't know.
Yeah. And you can bet that the game log watchers are taking notes, and he won't be that high on tonight. You know, he's going to slide under the radar. Got a question in chat that, the small details on a showdown can matter sometimes, but he says, Stephen Smith says the last game, Dwight Powell got some run, but we've seen Willie Cauley-Stein get some run too. Do you like either one of those guys, or who do you think the best bet out of those guys tonight?
Yeah, I'd go with Powell for sure. Let me just pull up Willie's game log. You know, he had that games 2 and 3. It looks like he had, mid-teens minutes, but I'm more inclined to trust the most recent information we have. And the most recent information we have is that Powell played a lot of those minutes. I think he used that 20 last game. The one thing I will note is be very, very careful with Powell on FanDuel, because I think he's going to have, even if it doesn't show it in this like projected ownership, he's going to have a lot of ownership on FanDuel. And I will tell you why. And I can do this on FanDuel with the lineups. So like I mentioned it, Luka, MVP, Kawhi, star, PG, pro. Like that's what people are going to do. Then they're going to play Boban because he's the best sheet play. That leaves you with $8,000. This is going to be by far the most popular lineup, and it leaves you with Dwight Powell as like the next highest projected guy. So be careful of his ownership on FanDuel. On DK, I'm not as worried about it because the lineup construction and roster construction and their scoring system is so different. It's more intricate. I don't think you have to worry about it over there, and he's only 2.8. So I do like him. I do like him over there, but just be careful on FanDuel because by default, his ownership might get inflated a little bit. But to answer the guy's question, yeah, I prefer Powell over Cauley-Stein.
Fair enough. Let's talk about some specific plays then. Let's start off with DraftKings and go through and see if we have any the guys who stand out to you. Now, I have two guys highlighted that I thought. I mean, we all know, if you can jam in Luka and Paul George and Kawhi, that's all good. But it's the other guys. It's finding that other game that's going to make it happen for you. Two guys I had. One guy you're not high on because of the ownership, and I don't know where I fall on the ownership, but Boban at 2.4K, like you said. Maybe not in the captain spot, or I mean, if we do get ownership updated and it does look really low, then maybe that is the play. I guess it's just an ownership play with Boban because just on paper the 2.4K on DraftKings does a lot for you in 20 minutes. If you were to get 20 minutes, it's probably a floor of 15 and a really high ceiling. And on Showdown, like if this was a 4-game slate, it'd be a totally different story. Like I could fade that, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
That may be a winning formula in a Showdown. So I like Boban at 2.4. I'll let you talk about that. And then the other guy that stood out to me was Batum at 5K. I think there's a chance he gets a lot of extra run here. He has been getting more run, but I just at some point you got to change it up here if you're Ty Lue, and you just got to go with this interchangeable defensive lineup, and he's part of it.
Yeah, so I'll talk Boban real quick. So if you're going to fade or go underweight on him, you have to be okay getting last. So because like you said, if he hits it, and it's not even like his 90th percentile or anything, it's like also his 60th percentile is going to be really, really good for 2.4K. And when I was looking at that Slate IQ stuff earlier, the highest projected owned captain was going to be Luka. The next one was going to be Kawhi. Then the next one was going to be Boban. And that's if those numbers come to fruition. Again, I think people like rostering Boban so much that I think his gets inflated regardless of what the numbers say. Like I think people are going to like rostering him because of what you can do for the rest of your lineup. But yeah, you have to if you're gonna fade him, you have to be okay getting last because you will be dead, and you can be dead after the first quarter with Boban. Chop like
first 5 minutes, man.
Well, yes, you could be done. He could have one of those like offensive rebound tip, block shot. Like you could be done by the end of his first rotation. So you have to be okay with that. But that's also how you get first place in some of these, as you know, as a multi-million-dollar DFS winner. Moving on to Batum. So what I will say is we have him projected for the minutes he's been getting lately, which is a fair amount. So we have him at 34, which is kind of what he's been in the past 2 games. What I will say is this: he isn't the greatest per minute guy. One of his big games, which was 2 games ago, he had 6 stops, and he can do that. Like especially in his heyday, that was kind of what he did. A lot of steals and blocks. So he also struggled a little bit defensively in that game. In game 5, he was the main culprit for like basically over helping on Luka as to why he found so many guys for open threes. Not saying that matters a lot, but like if that means Lue is a little quicker to pull him out for a Rondo or pull him out for Terrence Mann, maybe that means his minutes are a little lower. So let me look at his ownership though. The fact that we have him at 37%. I would maybe go a little bit under on that. How does that rank with the rest of the guys? Yeah, it's like he's the 6th highest projected owned guy. So I don't know how sneaky you're going to get because people see the minutes, and he's kind of got a decent price tag. He's not like dirt cheap, but he's not in like the upper mid tier. So I don't know. I'm a little indifferent on him. That ownership was a little higher than I expected, but it makes sense based on how much he's been playing lately.
So then there's the second train of thought. Then with that, if you think Batum is a fade in your lineups, and then who's going to replace him? Well, the spark plug last game was actually Terrence Mann, even though he passed up on an actual easy layup to win the game. I don't want to get into that with holding my Clippers series ticket. I don't want to get into, but he's actually kind of been a spark plug, and he's only been getting about 15 minutes a game. But if we expect maybe Batum to get yanked a little bit, and you want to play that guessing game, maybe Terrence Mann gets a little extra run tonight for cheap salary. So that's a possibility, right?
Yeah, and you see the fact that he basically closed, like he played almost the whole 4th quarter. That's a pretty big deal. I know a lot of it had to do with him coming back, and coaches tend to stick with the guys that get him there. But he only played, 2 or 3 minutes in the first half, and then saw those extended in the second half. So if that's fresh on Lou's mind and he likes the way that last lineup got them back into the game, even though they ultimately lost, I think that is a reason to think he gets more minutes. And again, I'll throw Rondo's name in the hat there, throw Zubac's name in the hat there. There's a handful of Clippers here that, Batum's, besides the studs, Batum is the highest projected Clipper. So like you're looking at the Rondos, the Zubac's, the Terrence Manns, those guys, and because they're basically in the same price range, like Morris and Reggie Jackson on DK are up in the 6s. So yeah, there's ways to get off Batum. And like we said, kind of at the start of the show, like we know who's going to be playing pretty much for the Clippers. So like you don't have to get too far off the radar here if you want to get another good play on their team.
Okay, a question from John in the chat. He wants to know what's the better way to start your team on DK? Is it putting? Well, we kind of talked about this, but I'll add a third option here. He says, is it to put Boban in captain? Is it the best way to start to put Luka in captain? And I'll just throw the third one in there. If not either one of those guys, which we've kind of already talked about, who is your favorite captain tonight?
Yeah, to say the best way to start is tough because it kind of depends on your risk tolerance a little bit, like we've already been alluding to. Personally, I think I would be going with Luka in the captain. That if I was like, let's say I was throwing one lineup in their $20 tournament tonight with 100K up top, I would put Luka in the captain because I do think he'll be a highly owned captain, but I don't think he should be as highly owned as he should be, I guess is the best way to put it. So if I was starting one lineup, it would probably be Luka because your lineup just feels so comfortable and cozy with Boban in there that I think a lot of people are going to do that. So I think you can do Luka and you can put Boban in a util spot, or you can fade him too if you want. Like that's a route as well. So that's how I would start a lineup on DK. Past those two guys, I would probably say Kawhi would be my next guy in. He had a down game last game. I mean, that's fair. He's allowed one of those because he had basically 55 or between 55 and 59 DK points in every other game in the series. So I think he's just looked too good in the series overall to think that last game was anything short of an anomaly. So if I was not going to do Luka or Boban and captain, I would go Kawhi.
Fair enough. Let's talk about FanDuel. Or you know what, DK, real quick. Who is your favorite play? Anybody else stand out for you that we haven't talked about on DK specific?
I think we've covered everybody. There's no one I want to stake my claim on or anything. So I think we've covered everybody. What I will note is there's going to be some really good leverage on guys like Josh Richardson and Jalen Brunson. Like if you look at last game, Josh Richardson was all but eliminated from the rotation, played spot minutes in a couple spot minute stints in each half, basically played 6 minutes. Brunson, they basically said, we're going to let you play when one of Luka or Hardaway needs a break, which was not often. Those guys play like 42, 45 minutes. So I like Richardson here because he's really cheap. And these two guys also were playing like 17 to 20 minutes in every game in the series. So like that could have just been a one game thing. Carlisle goes back to him. These guys aren't like great per minute as far as like Richardson, but he's 2.6. Like he could easily get back to playing 20 minutes. We haven't projected for 10 because we're just kind of weighing a lot of that information from last game. But like you can get really good leverage on these guys. Richardson, 9% projected ownership. Brunson, 7% projected ownership. I think those are really, really good plays for the large field tournaments.
And then let's just talk about FanDuel real quick. We've talked about the players. Are there any salaries that jumped out to you?
Not really. Excuse me, actually, because the FanDuel build is just so different, like I mentioned. So there's nothing that stands out from like, oh, this guy's too cheap or anything like that. And if they were, then everyone would play him anyway. So it's kind of less of a discussion about like the salary on FanDuel as it is about roster construction. So like a couple different ways to be different on FanDuel. The 3 studs, mix and match, and which multiplier you put them in. If you want to play all 3 of them, maybe put Kawhi MVP, maybe put Luka at pro, and then and PG in that middle one. And maybe it's a Clippers onslaught and the Clippers blow him out. But Luka's so good, he still finishes with a really high raw score. That's one way. Another way is take one of those guys out. Put a Porzingis in one of those spots, a Hardaway, maybe a Rondo or a Marcus Morris or something. You're just trying to find anybody who can come close to keeping up with those guys from a raw points perspective. And those are some of the guys I like. And then lastly, like when you're talking util spots, you're like thinking Boban. Do I fade Boban? If I am fading Boban, then you don't have to get too different in the multiplier spots. If you're not fading Boban, then you probably want to get really different in the multiplier spots. So those are some of the things I think of on FanDuel. the build and the scoring is just a little more simplistic than DK. So it's a completely different discussion, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I like that point. That's what I like to do in football. I touch on it all the time, where like you got those three spots up top there, and it's really easy to go Luka, Kawhi, Paul George, or Kawhi, Luka, Paul George. But you can still roster Boban. You can still roster that crazy roster of the same five players. But if you put Paul George up top in that very first, like that's going to cut you down to like hardly nobody is going to roster something like that, even though you have the same five players. And you look at Paul George, and he's dropped a couple 50s, a 46. He's got the upside here to make it happen. And so I like that. I like changing that up. Now, guys, tonight we do have a SuperDraft free roll for you. 1K RG free roll over on SuperDraft, single game, championship mode, 5-entry max. It's a free roll. So we got a link for you. Devin's going to drop it in chat. And I think we're just going to talk. Let's talk a few SuperDraft players now. I'll start this one off here. All right. So just looking at the format, and if you guys don't know, it's not a salary cap. It's about it's about multipliers and all this other good stuff. So you got Luka. He's not being multiplied at all. It's one time. All right. And then you got Kawhi at 1.15. So you're going to get a little extra for Kawhi. So I kind of like Kawhi at 1.15 because it's a little bit more than Luka. And I think those two totals, assuming I think the Clippers are going to win here, which I kind of do, and they kind of control Luka, and he doesn't get to that 70 mark. He hovers more around 50-ish. And Kawhi has his normal, typical 50-ish. That multiplier is going to set you apart from Luka. So I like him over Luka in that spot. I like him over PG-13 because PG-13's multiplier is only 1.2. It's just not enough gap there for me. So I'm feeling Kawhi. Another guy I'm feeling tonight on the SuperDraft that we didn't get to talk about yet as much on he's got a good price on FanDuel tool if you want to be different, is Marcus Morris. He's got a 2.1. So there's a big gap between the top four guys, Porzingis, Luka, Kawhi, Paul George. They're all far less than two multiplier, right? Then all of a sudden you jump up to 2.1, and Morris is in that category. So you're getting that big leap in multiplier for a guy who, man, if he's hitting his three-pointers, he could get you 30 to 33, 35 fantasy points tonight, and now you're multiplying by 2.1. So he's got some good upside in this group. Those are two guys I've highlighted on SuperDraft. Did you find anybody over there you really like, Andy?
Yeah, I have our projections pulled up for those watching the screen share. And as you can see, like I kind of alluded to him briefly when discussing something else earlier, but Tim Hardaway's kind of right there with Marcus Morris at 2.15 multiplier. And he played 45 minutes last game. So he's very shooting and scoring dependent. So keep that in mind when you roster someone like that. But at this minutes projection and his base fantasy projection, like he's easily leading our fantasy projections on SuperDraft. So 2 points there. One, be careful. I'm guessing, like, let's say everyone is using Lineup HQ to build these lineups for the free roll or for the other tournaments on SuperDraft. I'm guessing people are going to be getting a lot of Tim Hardaway in their lineups because we have him ahead of the field by a long shot in terms of the fantasy points. So be careful on him. Although I do like him, but I'm just worried about how high his ownership gets. The second thing I want to point out is Luka. Like you said, he doesn't have a multiplier, but I also just want to remind everyone that like these are median projections. Like our median projection for Luka right now is 55. I said earlier, he's had 70 plus in 3 of the 5 games. So like, don't be afraid of him just because you're not getting a lot of him in lineup builds. Like you might want to boost him a little bit or alter his projection a little bit to get a little more of him. Because like you said, if Marcus Morris scores 30, low 30s or whatever, and he gets boosted to right around 70, well, Luka could get 70 on his own. So without the multiplier. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with this SuperDraft format.
Fair enough, guys. I think that's just about going to wrap it up for us here on this Friday Showdown show. So get in all those tournaments, guys, because they will feel nice and early. Get in the SuperDraft, DraftKings, FanDuel. Good luck in all those GPPs, guys. We appreciate you tuning in. For Andy Means, for our producer, Devin, I was your host for this show, Head Chopper. And until next time, we're out of here.